Unfortunately, this Week in Stupid is going to have to be delayed a day or two because I ended up having guests this Christmas. But trust me, it is definitely worth the wait. You guys will enjoy this Week in Stupid, the Christmas edition. But until then, I guess I have to talk about something. And since there haven't been a lot of happenings because people do celebrate the holidays right now, so it's a very slow news week, I decided to go back in time and pull out something from a newspaper which I have found, which is the December 1989 television schedule. And for those of you who actually may be Gen Zers or even Gen X and didn't catch a life where the black and white television existed, this is pretty much how things were done. You would go into the newspaper and you would read what's on TV. There was no internet, there was no VCR in Romania, there was no other ways of entertainment besides going home and watching TV. I mean, sure, you could read a book alternatively, but overwhelmingly most people went home and they watched the television. And you would have like this newspaper which would actually tell you what's on, because a lot of time you would open the television and you had no idea what was on. You could even see a very interesting movie that you liked and you would have no idea what the title was called simply because you opened the TV 2 minutes after the movie started. So people would buy the newspapers and they would look at the schedule for that particular day, and that's how they knew what they were watching. Now, what's interesting about this particular schedule is that it never got aired. And this is due to the fact that on 22 December, the communist dictator helicoptered himself in order to get away from the angry crowd, which broke into the palace building and were about to lynch him. So he took a helicopter ride and then landed in a different city where he was later arrested. And then they had a kangaroo trial for him and he was executed on Christmas. So this TV schedule never got to air because I think they actually interrupted the transmission during that day to prevent the spread of misinformation. Of course, this is something that communists would do a lot of times in situations of crisis to manage to get ahead of the story. It's like Chernobyl exploded. Cut the phone lines, prevent the spread of misinformation. And then they would say, look, there was a fire, it wasn't that bad.
А это само здание станции. Как видите, огромных разрушений, о которых не умолкая твердят средства массовой информации Запада, нет. Поврежден только блок. Все производственные постройки, соседние здания, опоры электропередач целы.
Обязательным элементом при проведении работ на Чернобыльской АЭС.
So that's how things were done back then. When one of the Romanian cities by the name of Timișoara managed to become independent, they had the revolution there and they overthrew the communist regime. It was the same thing. They cut the phone lines, they stopped the spread of misinformation in order to get on top of it and tell people, oh, there are a couple of hooligans that are doing a little bit of damage in the public buildings, but everything is under control, don't worry about it. So, with that said, let's look at what people could watch on the television during communism, at least in Romania. Now, you can see that the program actually starts at 1 p.m. And this is very interesting because you might be wondering, well, what was before 1 p.m.? And the answer is nothing. It was static. The idea was that they would always start the broadcasting at 1 p.m. because before 1 p.m. people would be working. So everyone had to work under communism. People say, oh, well, it was a right to work. It wasn't a right to work, it was an obligation. Communists love to turn rights into obligations. So before 1 p.m., everyone was at the factory and they would actually have police officers patrolling the streets, and if they found an able-bodied person outside of working hours, they would arrest them and start asking them questions. Why aren't you at work? There is a famous case in my family where my uncle, who was an engineer at a factory, told me of a gypsy, a person of Roma ethnicity, who used to sing at weddings. So he had a job, like he was doing this in order to make money. But the police found him on the street and they took him to the police station. They applied a correction, as the communists like to say. It meant that the person is thinking incorrectly, and with physical punishment, you can correct the person's thinking. That was the morality at the time. And then they threw him in a factory. So the police said, how dare you have this liberal profession where in a weekend you make more than a working class man does within a month. So how are you setting a moral example? And because of that, they threw him in a factory. The person had absolutely no idea how to work in a factory. But, he had to go there because otherwise they would have applied another correction. So that's one of the reasons why the Soviet economy collapsed, is because you had a lot of people doing jobs that they weren't supposed to. Like you took a person doing what they called a liberal profession, singing at weddings, and he was a productive member of society, and now you're throwing him in a factory and he had no idea about any type of factory work. So he was more encumbering everyone else, right? He didn't have the physique to even carry or lift heavy objects. So that is what it is. But to go back to it, the program would start at 1 p.m. And they would start with the news. It was called the telejournal. So these were the news. Then they moved on to agriculture. So they would talk a lot about agriculture, and everything here was propaganda. Like they would say how the Romanians are farming usually 500 million kilograms of wheat. And when you're listening to that, you do the math and you realize that Romanians are not only farming in Romanian cities and Hungary and Bulgaria as well, but they sent an invasion force of tractors and harvesters in order to farm in France as well, in order to make that much. And it's one of the things where people knew that the government lies, the government knew that the people know that the government lies, but the government lied anyway. So they were pushing all of this complete nonsense and complete propaganda, which is why a lot of people wouldn't even turn on the television. So after they would bullshit you for 20 minutes about how well the Romanian agricultural system was going, and by the way, people were starving, but the agriculture was amazing. Like, you could watch the television and you could see the grain flowing everywhere, but not in your house. You would then be subjected to this program, which was called Complete Unity in the Romanian Motherland, Patriotic Revolutionary Songs. So for the next 15 minutes, you would listen to people sing patriotic songs. Now, this is something interesting because a lot of people think that communism is international and communism isn't really for the nation state. Yeah, when they're not in power. Like when they weren't in power, that's pretty much how they advocated the ideology. When they got in power, all of a sudden they realized, we have this nation we can control. Maybe we need some patriotic people, because patriotic people can do patriotic work. They can volunteer for the military. Patriotism is really good. Nationalism is great. So the communists, when they weren't in power, oh no, just put us in power because national borders, horrible. They bring war and blah, blah, blah. And when they got in power, it's like, useful idiots. You put us in charge now. So that's why you're going to see a lot of patriotism and patriotic songs, very strong national vibes. Some of the songs would be translated to things like the people, Ceausescu, so the people, the dictator, and the Communist Party. And the lyrics were something like, we fulfill what our ancestors have dreamed of, and we are taking their dreams to further glorious heights. Dun, da, da, dun. Like that's the type of songs you'd be subjected to. Afterwards, the next program was called One Thought, One Will, Worker Songs. So these were the songs of the workers that are working hard. But notice the epitome on unity, right? So absolutely nothing with freedom, but it's like utter unity, one thought, one will. So the idea that the communism was just an economical thing. No, okay? Like, communism has an economical aspect which does view how society needs to function and how the cash flow needs to be like. But it also had a social function. Like, no, every single person needs to think the same. Every single person needs to achieve healing and unity. Like, you can't have a nation where some people think one thing and some people think another, because communism is progress, and there is only one path to progress. So if you're not thinking the same, it means you're regressive. You're not trying to achieve that progress, which is why you need to have a correction applied to you, right? Because, again, like, some people can't think correctly, but, you know, like a television, which sometimes has a flickering image, so you apply a correction on top of it to stabilize the image. That's pretty much how the communists view things. Afterwards, they would have a program called We're Building a Lot and We're Building Beautifully. So this is a documentary which would last for 20 minutes. And after the documentary, you'd have the pride of being a Romanian citizens of the Socialist Republic. So even more propaganda. After this, you had a long break. So from 2:40, I assume like this would also be 20 minutes. So from 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. there was nothing. Now, you need to understand there was just one television station. There was nothing else to watch. The idea, the legend, the myth that some people who managed to go abroad to France, to UK, to America, my God, and they would go there and they would see that they had more than one television stations and they would operate all day. Like, that was something that blew people's minds. They just didn't believe that. They would think that they're fucking with you. It's like, why are you saying such bizarre nonsense? So the transmission would resume at 7 p.m., where you would have more of the news. And afterwards, it was the Congress of the Great Socialist Victories. The party program, the program for work, life, and the people. So they would decide what the people need, and you had the choice. You either agree with them and you're a respectable member of the people, or you disagree with them and then you're an enemy of the people, even though you're a part of the people a day before. So it's your choice, you know, like you get to choose. Do you want to believe that patriotic work is something that every citizen should do? So patriotic work would be, you're already paying taxes for people to mop the snow from the city, but patriotic work means that, no, you need to get your slippers, go out and mop the snow as well. And you don't get paid for it because it's patriotic work. Do you believe that's a good thing? If yes, then you're part of the people. If not, you're counter-revolutionary and you're an enemy of the people. Simple as. Another propaganda piece was right after this. It was Romania in the world. The Congress of the Communist Party, external and realistic constructive politics in order to bring world peace and international collaboration. And usually this was the quote-unquote external news. You might have a couple of nations that are disagreeing with each other and they're about to go to war, but the great dear leader manages to arrive there with his diplomatic envoy and talks with both of these leaders, and all of a sudden these nations are now fine with each other and they regret what they've done. This is the type of propaganda that they would show on television. And good luck debunking it, because again, you have no internet, you have no newspapers that talk about anything else but this. You have one television channel, you can't leave the country. There's no way that you could actually verify this information. So this was how the communists actually brainwashed people. And the great dear leader, he was almost mythological in his capabilities. And one of the reasons was to make it incomprehensible to rise up. I mean, look at this man. He is so charismatic. He can have two nations that are about to go to war, and he actually goes there with his envoy, puts them to the table, and all of a sudden, not only are they not going to go to war, but they become powerful allies, and now they're contributing together for the betterment of the world. I mean, just... and this is also what they did on the news, by the way. Like, the news was always positive. They never talked about any crimes whatsoever. So no murders, no rapes, no robberies, nothing. People felt incredibly safe, even though the crime statistics were through the roof. But on top of that, everything was positive. So no criticism at the government, no criticism at the leader, no criticism at politicians. You would just hear about a factory somewhere where people are desperate because the factory isn't producing properly and the output isn't what it's supposed to be. But luckily, the great dear leader goes down from the helicopter onto the factory grounds, and he talks with the people there, and all of a sudden, the factory is now producing at 300% the output, and everyone is clapping, and everyone's like, oh my god, thank you, dear leader, for coming here. That's what you would see on the news, nonstop, every day. So... At 8:30, you'd have The Children Are Singing, The Party and the People. This is a literary, musical, choreographic program, and this is what was meant for children. And you'd probably have like 5 minutes or 10 minutes of cartoons during this. But again, it was to indoctrinate the youth. Youth education, revolutionary spirit, getting the political ideology component, which is essential to educate the revolutionary young generation. So it's very fantastic that even after they won, I mean, the communists controlled literally everything. Every aspect of life, the Communist Party had a hand in it or a tentacle in it. They were still advocating for the revolution. The revolution would never end. Why? Because people in a revolutionary state are very vigilant, very watchful of their neighbors, right? The revolution, like your neighbor might be the enemy. So the revolution was meant to never end. And then at 9 and 10, with The Country in Our Hearts, patriotic revolutionary songs, and then they would end it with the news. So as you can see, the entire entertainment, like everything that was on television, was 100% propaganda. Just no out whatsoever. The moment you open till the moment you close the television, just non-stop propaganda. Now, there were certain things which you could watch, I guess. Very rarely you might have a football match, so you could watch that. And then you also had maybe a movie. Again, very rarely. And every now and then you had the special holiday. Like, for example, they didn't celebrate Christmas. Oh, God, no. But they could celebrate New Year's. And on New Year's, they would have a lot of leeway, let's say. Like, they actually allowed people to make jokes against the regime. They were very tame. They were kind of on the nose. But they kind of allowed that out. Only on New Year's. And I guess the reason they did it is... to open the steam valve a little bit. So that was very interesting, the fact that they actually allowed bad-mouthing against the regime one day a year. But anyway, right, so this is what you could see on television. Let me know what you guys think, and I'll see you in the comment section. Take care.